We are live.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me close this. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
1 second only to adjust here. I'm not sure. My YouTube, where's YouTube? Oh, 1 second only to adjust. Give me a second only to adjust here. I have two screens. Zoom. Okay, now. Strategic minerals, implications for geopolitics and energy. Welcome, Professor Cleveland Jones, and welcome, Dr. John Foreman. It's a pleasure having you both here in Cavanha Café's podcast. Good afternoon.
Pleasure to be with you, Cavanha.
It's a pleasure, Cavanha. The pity is that we're not drinking coffee, but anyway.
We can serve coffee for both. Well, Professor Jones has some slides, and I would like to ask him to start with the presentation. And Foreman, we are free to interrupt him and to make questions to him, but 3 quick questions and complicated question, please.
Cavanha, I just wanted to show some slides, and as you said, maybe we can comment on some of those as we go on. So first, when we talk about strategic minerals, a lot of people call them critical minerals. I think maybe that's an exaggeration in many cases, but yes, they're strategic. We have several categories, and this works many different ways, but basically, basic things: lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, graphite, for batteries, big demand and increasing. Rare earth minerals for wind turbines, electric vehicle motors, for all motors. This is not just for wind turbines. Copper, silica, silver, for solar panels. But here it's important to remember and recognize that many of these metals and minerals are important in other industries, not just in energy. For example, silver demand is forecast to grow significantly from the medical side as more and more uses of silver come on stream. So this is makes the energy demand even greater. It's additive. And then we have copper and aluminum, obviously, for transmission lines and distribution lines, which we've discussed in the past, and all the importance of the electric grid. But just to put some of this into context, and maybe you guys can comment on this, there's two graphs that the U.S. Department of Energy in their critical minerals assessment of 2023, I didn't see one in 2024. They have one, say, for the short term, up to 2025, and another one for the medium term. They say up to 2035. And you see here increasing importance to the energy sector and increasing supply risk because of limitations, perceived limitations in supply. And for the short term, we have the upper right-hand corner is the critical part. That's where the supply risk is very high and the importance to the energy sector is very important. For example, some of the rare earth minerals, and we have all those red dots. But the key here is, this year and next year. But if you go, say, the next 10 years, that is the important part, because that not only is longer term, but if it were to be exactly as they forecast, also gives us time to work on things. And this, I think, is one of the important aspects I wanted to bring up later. So you see now in the upper right hand corner, we have more minerals. We have lithium and nickel and cobalt and graphite, and besides some of the rare earth minerals. So they seem to think things are just getting tighter and worse, and and more critical, and they're going to be more strategic and higher demand. That probably implies higher prices in their view.
But Cleveland, please, there is a research concentration, I suppose. A few countries control most of these strategic resource, and this can create a geopolitical, let's see, imbalance. Or how do you see this point?
Yes, I think this is the important aspect that in general countries worry about. It's just like energy independence or energy security. No one is going to be independent, but they're going to be energy secure if they have sources from different countries. The problem is right now, of course, that many of these critical strategic minerals are vastly controlled by China in terms, maybe not of mining, but in processing, so that the final product comes from China. And no one else has much refining or processing capability other than China. So that is a problem for many of these minerals. Just like uranium is critical in some sense because Russia actually is a big supplier, and the growth in nuclear energy might be compromised by the fact that maybe Russia could limit some of those supplies in the future. I have diverging views. John probably can speak better to that, but it depends where those critical minerals are coming from. If there's a diversified source, it's not so worrisome, but the overall demand can still be much higher than the projected production, and that is a problem because that will drive up prices and so on.
Yeah, John, in terms of uranium, how do you see this dependence? Because Brazil could be a big producer, but is not at this time.
Yeah, it's not.
It's true, Kevin. My comment to what has just been said is when you look at these graphs, well, this is the picture for the US.
Yes.
It's not for the world.
Exactly.
First. Second, it deals only with the minerals themselves.
Yes.
As you mentioned, Jones, China today, for instance, when you talk about rare earth, they control 70% of the production. Not only of those minerals, but also of the products, because today they dominate the market for the solar panels and are dominating for the eolic turbines too.
Yeah.
So looking only at my point is looking only at the minerals, you fail to see the complete picture. For instance, cobalt in both graphs is critical.
Yes.
Today, cobalt production comes only from the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yes, one country.
Today, produced by the Chinese there in very, very dear conditions. Nobody talks about that. We're going to talk about the geopolitical implications. We talk about nickel, which is critical in the second graph. Malaysia has very large nickel reserves. What they did, they said, okay, you want to mine, you have to process here.
Yeah.
And the companies did. Why I'm mentioning that? Because when we come to discuss Brazil, we talk only about minerals. Nobody talks about the need to process them. And for that, you need technology. And that the technology is not available, and we don't have it. So it just complicates more.
Yeah, that's right. But John, I wanted to point out something. This is often spoken that, well, China, of course, not only controls the production of the refined minerals, but it also controls the production of the batteries themselves, of the solar panels, and that
equipment and systems.
Yeah, but
they make the most of this.
But there's another question. The fact that they control so much of that also implies that they cannot really, in practice, control the supply and say, well, we will limit production by 50%. On the contrary, their oversupply, their overcapacity of production of solar panels, for example, is so huge that they are compelled to export as much as they can. And the world indirectly benefits from dirt cheap solar panels, which are flooding the markets everywhere. Everybody's complaining, oh, cheap solar panels. But China is flooding the world with solar panels. And in that sense, it is strongly influencing the growth of solar energy because the panels are so cheap. So there is the other side of the coin is that because they control basically all of the production and they can't, even if they want to, absorb all of it. They are absorbing a large part already, but they have an excess. And they are compelled to export that excess. So as long as we have that situation where the producer is also very strongly incentivized to export, we are probably in a relatively safe territory. We are in much less safe territory in the instance, for example, of Russia and so on, where it is not necessarily the only supplier of uranium, but it could affect the market and it could limit exports without drastically hurting the country. That could be considerably worse, don't you think?
I agree with you in part, Cleveland, because the point is your reasoning is the reasoning of a private company. Now we're dealing with economies that are not capitalistic at all. So
For
if
sure.
political reasons, China decides no more solar panels to the world, that will be it. Period.
Well,
Same
Very
thing
big
about
problem.
Russia.
but that will be a
Russia,
very
you're talking about uranium. Russia is
yeah.
not a very large producer, but the countries like Kazakhstan and so are. At this point in time, these countries are, let's say, using their uranium production to supply mainly Russia and China, because China has a huge demand for uranium. Is building 20 odd nuclear reactors at this moment.
Has
And
400
pretty soon
plus
we have
reactors.
the largest fleet of uranium reactors in the world, a position that today belongs to the US. So these guys are saying, okay, we are going to use the uranium. We're not going to export. Now, Kazakhstan is responsible for 40% of the uranium which is exported to the world.
Wow.
So if that goes to China and Russia, the rest of, let's say, Western world will have to find new sources.
But
I
John,
say, hey, I'm going to get them my sources in Niger. They just fought with France and say, I'm not exporting uranium to France any longer.
yeah,
For only political reasons.
Yeah, exactly. Good reasoning, and that's the risk that the world runs. Not this assessment of the United States, but I think that there is a greater risk that a country like Russia, because of pressures, maybe wars and so on, might make the decision specifically on uranium supplies to the world rather than Kazakhstan, which is very dependent on those exports. So the risk might be bigger for a smaller supplier than for a larger supplier.
Anyway, what we're talking about really, Cleveland, we're talking about these whatever you could call them, economic blocks or political blocks, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you have the China, Russia, in case of the BRICS, including Brazil, that belong to a certain economic
block.
How could I put it? And some, okay.
Let me
the US on the other side. Now, you have at this moment the US proposing to Brazil, they are going to propose in the G20 meeting in Belém,
in November,
a cooperation for rare earth. And Brazil is not willing to take into account that because they rather deal with China.
Yeah. Some preference in terms of China instead of United States.
I speak a little bit to that. Let me just this I wanted to speak about this because this leads to the trends that may affect the worsening or the lessening of the extremes that we are facing. And remember, we already had extreme prices back in 2010, 11 for some rare earths, 4 times and even more what they are today. So we already experienced extreme peaks in prices of certain minerals and elements that were in particular demand and so on. And now they came down. So this shows that things are very variable. Supply and demand of some of these minerals is very volatile and price responsive. And indeed, if certain factors come into play, this could get worse or better. Some of the factors that can make things worse are, of course, if the European Union or the US or whatever ramps up the energy transition, which will use more of these minerals, that can make things a little bit worse. If big investment programs like the IRA in the United States begins making grid updates, grid upgrades, that will use, for example, more copper and so on. That may make shortages and price increases. And of course, if we have geopolitical crisis events like problems in China or Taiwan or something where China might have supply problems, that those considerations have to be taken into account, just like the opposite, the factors that could tend to moderate excessive demand, because there are many of those. New production can come from new technology and recovery of some of these minerals, processing technologies, advanced flotation, many others. I follow a lot of these technologies on a spreadsheet. There's higher efficiencies that can be achieved in the uses of some of these minerals in appliances, in electric cars, in transmission and distribution lines. We spoke about the superconducting transmission lines are beginning to catch on in some countries.
Yeah, but nobody is speaking about the environmental impact of this huge extraction. Is it something important, ethical and moral?
Okay,
important?
yeah, I could have added that on the prior screen. Maybe that would make sense. Personally, I think that the environmental problem might come up more if we let this become an extreme crisis. I don't think it is. I don't think it will reach that. But if it did, of course, one of the crisis angles would be not just excessive prices, but excessive production at very risky countries or with very big social problems or very big environmental impacts. That could be a problem also. But I think these mitigating factors have to be considered. And in fact, they have already acted, because the prices came down exactly because people have begun to see alternatives: non-battery storage, large capacity systems, pumped storage, new photovoltaic types, biofuels, and other base electricity production can reduce the need for a lot of those new energies that consume more of these minerals. And of course, you heard me mention this, artificial intelligence is making a big difference in every aspect, even in allocating resources, in developing alternatives, driving technology faster for coming up with alternatives. That is a key factor, very difficult to point a finger at when that will work.
Yeah, Foreman, how do you see geopolitical power difference and environmental issues in terms of energy transition for minerals?
Yeah, that's a good question that demands a long answer from my point of view. You see, as I understand it, Cavagna, most of these issues having to do with environment and so forth, they are basically political.
Yeah.
So it's a tool that was developed, from my point of view, I've mentioned this to you already, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. because the left was lacking a convincing speech to say that socialism was good. The wall fell, and the Germans from the Oriental part, most or all who could, migrated to the West. So it was not paradise.
Mhm.
And they decided to go into this business of environment as a tool to make things difficult. You want to be independent. You have cheap energy using oil, so we're going to act on oil so that it becomes impossible for you to use the oil that you have, or your gas, or whatever. We're talking about mining. Mining, not only in Brazil, but all over the world,
Yeah.
it's a mess. You get a environmental license to mine today is a process that lasts at least 10 years if you are successful. There's a copper mine in the US that was torn down recently this year after 10 years of negotiations for a license on the environmental issues. So this is, from my point of view, again, is a political issue. You're going to face that anytime you want to do anything that will allow you to have cheap energy against those who today are forced to use expensive energy for lack of an option.
But John, that is, I agree with most of that. Some of the difficult things to foresee are the speed and the achievements that new technologies can bring about. And we saw this happen first, of course, in pharmaceutical industry, artificial intelligence, selecting drugs and so on. But that is coming to the energy sector. It's already made big inroads into the oil and gas sector. And more, it is making inroads into the various energy subsectors, battery storage, photovoltaic developments, even alternative energies from other sources that are benefiting from upgrades and so on. And we have the non technologically dependent new sources. For example, geothermal is almost 100% conventional technologies, basically the same as oil and gas uses, maybe in the same regions, very little additional environmental impact. That could conceivably grow very fast if it makes certain achievements. And of course, if nuclear catches on, maybe 5, 10 years, we could also see that as making a big difference because all of a sudden you would have additional base power, which is very reliable from nuclear plants. So that is an alternative that I believe can come about from new technology, but you can't forecast it because it's very difficult to say when it could be successful, right?
Agree with you. First of all, let me say that in agreeing with you, I have to go back to the discussion of the 19th century between Ricardo and Malthus. Malthus was always arguing in favor that we would die of hunger because there would never be enough food.
Sure.
And Ricardo would say, no, if you have technology, you're going to solve that problem. He has been proved right. But the timing for
So
that
far.
is unforeseeable.
Yeah,
Completely,
exactly.
entirely. And there, Cleveland, lies a big problem because you have what I usually call the magical thinking. Oh, we're going to have new batteries, which are going to be much more efficient and much more cheaper.
Yeah.
When? Nobody knows.
Exactly.
If
and they won't need
and
all
when.
these critical minerals.
Well, if we are to use the present day batteries, there's not enough minerals in the world to
Of
produce
course.
them. As
Exactly.
simple as that.
Yeah, Cavagna and I discussed a while back that this is also a question of how far out are you looking? If you say, I want to look 50 years out, we may well solve a lot of problems. But we have to live those 50 years, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. We're more or less married to the technologies that we have now. The hope is that artificial intelligence could accelerate technological development as it has in some industries, but this is very iffy, and that is a big question.
Yeah, but
that's the magical thinking about Clinton.
Yeah. Artificial intelligence does not replace.
You're hungry today, Cavagna?
Yeah.
You're hungry today? Don't worry. In 10 years, I'll give you dinner.
Okay? But artificial intelligence cannot replace energy demands. Only accelerate or improve some parts. Yeah, it's not. But how do you see?
What Cleveland says that it will help to bring in new technologies.
Yeah,
that's what he's saying.
Yeah, but it's not enough.
On the other hand, it demands a lot of energy.
Yeah, that's right.
Right now, it's actually contributing to increased demand because even just running the big data centers for artificial intelligence is the demand of a small country. But look, just like all of these things can continue to be a problem going forward, and we can't foresee that everything is going to be rosy, but there are geopolitical implications, particularly for China, which John rightly pointed out, as a major supplier of many of these minerals, which are so strategic, because there are
products, not minerals. Products, not minerals.
Okay, products, yeah, end products, yes, but many of those are in fact able to be produced elsewhere, because if you produce minerals in Africa or in South America and you have policies to produce domestically some batteries or whatever, you could begin to break that cycle.
But Cleveland, John, Foreman, this type of energy transition we are facing nowadays can damage the energy security process in the world, because we have with this energy transition intermittence coming, and we need other energy source to back up the processes.
Now we spoke about the importance of storage,
geopolitical sensitive processes. So how do you see energy security related to energy transition? Or how do you see this two phrases?
John?
Energy security. Again, as I see it, it will be solved within these great economic groups. Depending which group you attach yourself, the country, you might have more or less. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But that is something, again, that it's very difficult to predict or to foresee.
Well, we do have some trends now, John.
Governments change. We had a government here last government we had a point of view which is entirely different from the present one. And the present one may be giving way to another one that might think differently from the two.
Yeah.
It's not the people, it's the government. And the government, you never know who's going to be elected and what really will be their objectives, final. The same in the US today, for instance. You're talking about an election between Democrats and Republicans, and depending on who wins, what can be said is that the policies will differ remarkably, depending on who is elected, Trump or Kamala.
Totally different.
But John, look, there are some trends exactly because there is these groups on opposite sides in the world. We are beginning to see, for example, very concerted efforts, as you mentioned, the U.S. reaching out to Brazil, for example, to develop relations for developing critical minerals and so on. Those efforts are ongoing now, which were not a big deal 4 or 5 years ago. And those are directly in response to the Chinese presence and the growing presence of China in many African countries and so on. Personally, I don't know if the U.S. can be very successful after not paying attention to many of these countries for so many years, all of a sudden is going to pat them on the back and say, oh, we've been friends forever. You know, we're going to develop energy resources and strategic minerals together. And just like you pointed, many countries like Brazil might say, wait a second, you know, I may have an interest in aligning more to the BRICS and the Chinese side. And that is something that has to be handled diplomatically. You don't go to war over it, but you might take some lumps, you might lose some points here and there, because those are ongoing strategic moves that might be successful or might not, depends who offers more here and there. But there is an overriding thing going on, which is market forces affecting prices. And you know, the best solution to high prices is high prices, because they tend to lower the demand and they provide greater incentives to find alternatives and to decrease the demand and increase the supply. So this is a natural process if you believe in markets, and I believe, not necessarily every point in the future, but given 2, 3, 4, 5 years, things tend to even out. So new supplies might come into demand, into supply in 5 years, not in the mining sector, because as you know, it takes 10 years or more to bring new mines into production, but increased supplies can come from alternative sources.
Well, Cleveland, let me make a statement to start with. If I had anything to do with decisions to be taken by the country, I certainly would not choose the BRICS. But that's me. That's not the politicians. Because as you, I believe in markets. But those guys don't.
Yeah, that's a little problem.
They believe on an organization, political organization. That's
and they use that as a political tool.
But very effectively.
We were talking about uranium. Uranium, the U.S., based on political ideas that were very popular not long ago, globalization, that sort of thing, they stopped mining uranium, producing the hexafluoride, enriching the uranium, and so forth. And they brought it all where from? Russia.
Weird.
So suddenly you get this Ukrainian war and things change, and how are we going to handle that?
Dubious.
Okay. Very few people realize that when the states designed all the constraints to Russia, one area which was kept out was uranium. They controlled, they took all the Russian banks out of the international system except for one, which was the one that handled the orders for uranium.
Yeah.
Nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
Okay, Congress has voted in the US to stop imports by 2030. Fine.
And how will we replace this?
No, you have the exceptions, which the government has been granting to keep on importing from Russia. Until the moment Russia says, no more.
They stop anytime.
They stop. And then they have to start anew. They are working hard. They're making all sorts of efforts to reopen uranium mines, but the uranium production in the US for this year represents roughly 20% of the demand of the nuclear reactors in the US.
Just the existing reactors, so not even thinking about growing. But this is where, Cavagna said, Brazil has some potential, many other countries do, and some countries have potential to increase production from existing mines.
But
that
takes
doesn't
time.
happen overnight.
That takes a long time to develop
but
some
that's the
mining.
thing. Maybe not as long as a new mine, and not as longer than a year, maybe, but not as long as a new mine. So we might be talking 2, 3 years, we begin to see some growing supply from alternative sources. Alternative sources means increasing production from some existing mines, and maybe bringing production from deactivated installations. We in Brazil, for example, had identified areas that could be producing maybe in 3 years.
Well,
Increasing
something.
prices could bring back a lot of areas which have been abandoned.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but these sorts, do not consider that market influence, geopolitical influence, interest, a relationship between countries. So they are not available to develop something in 2 or 3 years.
No, but
I do
this is
not believe
where
in that.
no, but this is where I mentioned the prices do have an effect. Maybe not in all minerals because some are mostly controlled by politics. But for example, we were talking about lithium a while back in energy transition. It seems very clear nowadays that lithium, which was the big scare that was going to be so scarce, it's very clear that lithium will be abundantly supplied by the oil industry and in the first place by the United States in the next 2 or 3 years, and production will skyrocket. So it might even place some geopolitical pressure on current suppliers. Already we see the lithium triangle in South America, Bolivia, Chile, and so on, Argentina. But Brazil maybe has a little bit, but the United States will by far surpass those efforts, and it will be the leading lithium supplier maybe in 5 years. But that is the time frame that we can look at how these pieces on the chessboard of the world geopolitics might fit. You cannot expect things to be fixed in 1 or 2 years, but in 5 years, that's enough time. It's very fast, but it's enough time if you have technological developments, as we've seen, from produced water in oil fields in Texas have some of the highest lithium concentrations because no one ever paid attention to those. Now they recognize that the lithium is there, they were just wasting it. Now it's feasible, and Exxon is already got a pilot growing.
But do
so
you
once
believe
you
that?
have the big majors in it, it
But
goes.
do you believe that Democrats will allow people to explore lithium in the United States again?
I believe it's going to be very difficult to stop. Maybe John has inside information. I don't.
He talked with Biden.
No. In this specific case, no, I don't think it will be much of a problem.
Yeah.
Because you're dealing with something which already exists, which already produced, which is already known.
Yeah.
For instance, when Cleveland brings about a new technology and so forth, and we're talking about the US, the revolution that the shales brought was something really, really amazing.
Very strong revolution.
The US is today the largest exporter of LNG.
Yeah.
It's not the middle.
Yeah.
The miss the word now. So the Arabs are not so important. So what are they doing now? They're talking about creating an OPEC for gas.
For gas.
Yeah,
Not too far away.
And very soon OPEC for minerals.
They'll be soon, pretty soon. They used to exist. You had usually based in London the metal institutes. So you had the Stanu, the Tin Institute, the Copper Institute, and so forth, and they existed and they sort of regulated market and prices.
Very good point.
But when we talk about critical minerals, the concept of critical minerals is something which was developed after the First World War, because they realized when the First World War was finished, that Germany had prepared itself and they had stored all the metals and minerals they needed to face the war. So the idea of strategic minerals came up. The US created a very large
stockpile,
huh?
It was a
stockpile,
yes. Yeah.
Stockpiles, enormous, which again were based on the fact that you needed to have those minerals available for a world war.
Yeah.
And that the last war that was sort of that type was in Korea. Vietnam War showed that you have these little attrition wars restricted geographically. So there was no need to keep with these huge stockpiles. The US sold stockpiles in the market and they simply broke many companies and destroyed the metals institutes in London. So maybe they have to be recreated now.
I think it's a very good historical lesson, Akavanya, because we have to remember what happened in the past when we see the dominance that is in place now and how difficult it might be to break this dominance and how much money it might take to break this dominance.
Cleveland, Foreman mentioned the regulation process. Do you believe that we can have international regulation among countries? I mean, many countries participate in a regulation for mining, for energy transition, things like that.
Very difficult, Kavanya. I am very skeptical of that because we've seen.
Oh my!
It's going to be very difficult. That is why we may have two groups that might implement some kind of control of operations and sharing of production share and so on, like mini OPECs. But this is going to be very difficult to expand into a world order at this point. Very unlikely.
And the role of an international energy agency, are they doing something important for the energy transition?
They produce only reports political? Every year.
I think they're useless.
I think the same.
They provide data on the past years and provide nice graphs and so on. Forecast is something else. Very difficult to forecast the future, but it is important to have an international energy agency. But it's not very effective. Just like John said, I think what we have to look to is politics. If the countries are serious about tackling, their energy needs, they will need to embark on policies, international relations with trading partners, with producing countries that produce materials they need, products they need. And this is a possibility going forward. And I think is one of the things we've seen that China has not broken with the West because they have mutual interests. If we can preserve that and improve that, maybe we can move forward without major upheavals and have China supply the world with a lot of these products. And gradually, maybe some of the global South countries might begin producing more. And eventually, I said this before, I think eventually China's dominance will be reduced because it's a natural process, but it can work smoothly for a while.
Going to the end of our conversation today, let me understand from both of you about Brazil. What Brazil should do in terms of minerals extraction, equipment, manufacturing processes. Foreman is laughing, like Kamala. Foreman, that's a good question for you. You could start, please. Yeah. How do you expect from Brazil as a player in this situation of energy transition?
I think that we're losing time. We're dragging our feet. Mm-hmm. That's the point.
Yeah.
We're not worried about that at all.
Yeah.
Our authorities and so forth, they think that everything is fine, nothing has to be done. When you look at for instance, when you look at the mining industry in Brazil, mm-hmm. and you look at the National Mineral Agency, it's a mess. It doesn't have enough people. They're all old, badly paid. It doesn't work. And who cares?
Despite all of the potential as a major supplier.
Exactly. And then when you look at the people who are in control, the directors or councilors, whatever you want to call them, they are political choices. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're doing. So you end up with people talking a lot about many things. I once in a while, quite often, in fact, I hear some people from CPRM talking about these essential minerals, these, that, and the next thing. But it's an empty discourse.
Speech.
But
It's the position of an individual that does not represent even his company or agency, whatever, much less
but
the
John,
government.
look at this last slide. I wasn't even going to show it, but this is for the United States. But when you get to the point where you have 10, 20 minerals that are more than 50% imported, then a big economy like the United States, maybe the European Union, then politicians might start taking measures. The only problem is that that doesn't apply to countries like Brazil and other developing countries because they have other priorities in their agendas, and they are suppliers of so many basic commodities already that, you know, adding more comfort zone to or security to their position is not the top priority. But when you get a major economy in a situation like this, then you see the United States beginning to act on energy security, on import substitution of some of these minerals, product incentives for producing, which to some extent they're useless because you cannot compete with Chinese solar panels. But like I said, 5, 10 years, maybe things can change. But this is what moves countries
But
for political
we are
change.
doing nothing to happen this 10 years you are mentioning. What are you doing?
You're talking about the U.S. The U.S. With this Biden government, they have decided to spend a pile of money on the nuclear area for new reactors, to open mines, and so forth. And what we do, we drag our feet about angle 3. We talk, I heard the minister today, I think I sent you guys a
Yeah.
speech to the Câmara dos Deputados. We have to pay attention to the fuel cycle, uranium fuel cycle, and so forth. You have to pay. And yet he has a company that is run by people who don't know what they're doing.
In many cases, in most cases, political assignments lead to that. And I think it takes a crisis maybe for a country to really move away from that situation and begin to put technicians and technical people in those spots. But it requires a crisis. Like I said, if you don't have a crisis, things are fine. They think, leave it as it is. That's the problem. And that's why we will be looking at this for the next 5 or 10 years, very slow progress.
Wow.
But
that's it. Very good.
Okay. You see, back when I started studying geology, the mine sector was handled by the agricultural minister.
Mm.
And then the Ministry of Mines and Energy was created in 1960, and everybody thought, wow, now we're going to have something. Well, 60, now it's 60 years over, and it has been a ministry, for energy, sometimes for oil, and very, very seldom for mining.
Yeah, almost nothing. Yeah.
That's the problem. So you get the only minister that knew anything about mining that ever sat in that chair was what's his name now?
Albuquerque.
No, it was the minister for Jango.
Oh, that's far back.
Yeah, he was the president of Vale. Yeah. What's his name now? Cleveland, forget now. Ike Schweiler.
Yeah, but that just shows, Kalina, that maybe we cannot be very optimistic about how fast things will change, because we've seen that things can go on for a very long time without fixing themselves. Even though I believe prices can help and some developments, just countries avoiding war makes them do certain things, but it's not very rosy out.
Yeah. Professors was a
It's a
great
question of priorities. Just
priorities.
today,
Sure, no
today,
doubt.
today it was approved in Congress the subsidies to produce clean hydrogen. We're going to use our money to reduce the cost of hydrogen to export it to Europe.
Yeah, look at that.
Now,
Yeah, Cavaglia and I have discussed hydrogen, and we
I do not like
agree
this.
that hydrogen, as it's presented so far, is not a very good choice.
Attractive,
But
yeah.
it's going to be very difficult to change that in the short run.
yeah, but it's the hype.
Yeah,
It's
That's
politically correct.
politically correct. That's the point. It's not business driven.
No, no, no. When it's pushed by the people who want that hydrogen cheap. In other words, Europe.
Yeah, copying Germany, the Green Party of Germany.
Anything that has to do with hydrogen in Brazil is financed by the German government.
Yeah, and groups of
that's another topic we have
organizations.
to touch some base
Yeah,
sometime.
good point.
But so far, this is good.
Professors, thank you so much. It was a great pleasure. Professor Cleveland Jones and Professor
Pleasure
John
was
Foreman.
mine, Gawain, to exchange a few ideas with you and Cleveland.
Great.
I like very much and recognize his capabilities in these energy and mining sectors.
Yeah, it's a
Very
great
good to have you,
potential
John.
for the future. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Cavaglia.
A great day for you both.
Great day. Bye bye.
Bye bye now.
Bye bye.